All right, so today I want to talk about painting MDF. Now, MDF is a nice wood to use for a lot of different projects because it's got a nice, smooth, flat surface, especially when you're making stuff for shop. You know, your shop, it's really a good wood to use, and you've seen that like in this video up here on my table or my countertop. I used MDF underneath the Formica for that countertop. So it's a nice flat wood. It doesn't expand or contract. It's really a nice stable thing to use, and it's relatively inexpensive. Now in this particular case, my mom needed something where she builds these jigsaw puzzles, and so she needed something that could rotate around. So like if she's working on a puzzle on the table, instead of having to get up and go all the way to that corner, she can rotate that corner on over and put the pieces in. So all it is a piece of MDF on top of a heavy-duty Lazy Susan underneath. So this just sort of just comes right up. But what I want to do is I wanted to put a nice little finish on it. So I wanted to use spray paint. So it just so happened that I have 3 cans of yellow, and 2 of them are brand new, one's not. So I decided that it's going to be yellow. But the only problem with MDF is the fact that you can get a nice finish on it, but you do have to seal it pretty well. Now, I've used a primer on it before, and that takes quite a few coats, and you have to sand down in between each one of them before you get a nice finish or a nice base to put your finish on. And I've tried using wood glue, thinned down quite a bit, and put it over there to seal it, and that worked relatively well. I also used spackle on the edges here, and that helps seal it up. Now the edges generally soak in quite a bit. So the primer does work well, but it does take a lot of coats, and like I said, you have a lot of work before you get it done. The wood glue works relatively good, except that you do get a rather bumpy, uneven surface that you do have to sand down, so it does take a little bit of work. So I went online and I checked out different videos to see which one, you know, people recommend, how they seal the MDF. And the one that made the most sense to me was using a sanding sealer like this here. And I have some Minwax sanding sealer, which I went to my local big box store and just bought a quart of it to try. And so what I'm going to do is, and the nice thing about sanding sealer is I use it on wood turning all the time, and it just seals up the wood. It gives a nice smooth finish, and it doesn't require that much sanding or that much work afterwards. So it's not like primer where you're building it up, or the same thing with wood glue where you're building it up. So this sort of goes into the wood, seals it, and forms a small layer across the top that's easy enough to sand down with just a little bit of sanding, which is what I'm hoping. So I figured, let's try this out. So this is what I'm going to use to put down a coat of sanding sealer on this, and then especially along the edges. And then I'm going to go ahead and spray this, and we'll see how good that works, and if that takes less time than the other stuff that I did before. So let's try it. Okay, so this is the first time I've actually ever used the Minwax sanding sealer, and it's a water-based product. So the nice thing is, it did open up the garage door just to make sure, you know, I didn't fumigate myself out, but it actually doesn't give off that much in the way of fume, so it's rather nice to work with. I use just these old cheap brushes that, you know, I get at Harbor Freight. I think I get 32 or 48 of them for, you know, 10 bucks or something like that, or 8 bucks. They're relatively cheap, so I use them whenever I can. You could use foam brush, you could use a pad to put this on, but all the air bubbles seem to pop out pretty quickly as it's, you know, before it dries, so you don't have that. It looks like it's done pretty well. I added some extra on the edges because the edges are generally the part that soak up the paint the most. So I tried to give a nice thick coat along all the edges here, so we'll see how that works. But it says just one coat of this should work, so that's what we're going to try, and then we'll go ahead and spray paint this, which I think when I do that, I will take it outside though, or at least halfway out there, maybe to, you know, the edge of the door, so I get some shade still. But I will spray paint it. But after it dries, I'm going to give it a quick sand with about 400 grit, maybe 600, and then we'll go ahead and paint it up and see how well it works as far as how much paint I have to use so it soaks it in. So the idea here basically is that, you know, you can put enough coats of paint on to eventually fill it all in, but it costs you a lot because, especially in my case, I'm using rattle cans here. So the idea is to seal it up so that it takes just a few coats, and then plus it gives a much cleaner finish on it because it has a nice flat surface to work with. It's not a porous surface, and so we'll see how that works, and hopefully my mom will like yellow, so we'll see. Okay, so it's been about an hour and a half, and I'm gonna go ahead and give this a quick sand of some 500 here I have on it, and feels a little rough, but I'm not sure how fast this stuff will sand. Oh, that didn't do well. But that already feels perfectly smooth, so it's not going to take much. So I'm going to go ahead and continue sanding. How will they do? So what I want to do is I want to go on a few thin coats at a time. Make sure that's enough. So rattle can may not be the best choice here, but it's whatever. All right, so I finished up spray painting this, and so what is my verdict on this? Well, actually, I think that this stuff seals fantastic. And I think one coat across the top is more than it needs. It was really easy to sand, smooth. And I think on the edges, I'll try and get some close-up shots to show you here. But on the edges, I do have some gaps there where it still kept sucking in the paint. And I think that's because I didn't put a thick enough coat. So what I think you gotta do is I think you need to go along the edges first, give them a nice thick coat, then paint over all the top part, and then come back and get another coat on the edges. Because I think if you got 2 coats of this on the edges, they're gonna be sealed perfectly and you're not gonna have an issue. But overall, it looks great. I mean, I got yellow going over, you know, a very dark brown, which wasn't easy to cover, so I had to put a number of coats on. But as far as the finished result, everything's smooth. I have some dust in here, which of course, as you saw in the video, I'm spraying outside, so I'm not in a booth where I can control the wind, and there is a little bit of wind going on and some dust flying around. But overall, I think my mom's gonna be happy with it. And I do recommend that using this is probably, of all the ways that I've done finish on MDF, I think that this is probably the best way to seal it up before you go and paint it. Whether you're going to roll it on, paint it on, spray it on. I think if you use some of the sanding sealer and get a nice coat of that on there and then sand it down smooth and then just go ahead and put on your paint, it'd be perfect. Now, I think if you really were looking for a nice gloss where you had this mirror finish that you wanted on this, what I would do is I'd use the sanding sealer, sand that a little bit so it's all flat. Then I'd put on a coat of primer, because now the primer is not going to suck in, so it's only going to take 1 coat. Sand that coat of primer down nice and smooth, and then go ahead and put my finish on it, and you'll probably end up with like a glass smooth finish. But for what this is going to be used for, I think it's perfect. I think this is a great way to go. And I want to thank all of you for watching and staying here this long. Please do subscribe and leave a comment. If you have another way that you finish MDF, I'd sure like to hear it. I don't mind trying other methods to do things. So yeah, leave a comment if you have another way of finishing off your MDF. So let me know. Thanks for watching.